Well, that's a no-brainer. You just have to go outside and see it for yourself. No matter where you are in America, you're either in a drought, a flood, a tornado, a hurricane. Something is happening.
You believe there's no such thing as global warming. I dare you to just live in the Bahamas, especially on the island of Grand Bahama, for the next 10 years, and you be the judge of that. We've experienced it. We've seen where our beaches have eroded. We've seen where our water lenses have been impacted. We've seen where our coral reefs have died off. And that's because we're living it. So we expect for any naysayers to really visit us and see for yourself what's happening to these islands. We're losing these islands, we're losing lives. Global warming is definitely real.
My work with climate change has to do with helping the public understand this very complex issue and their role in it. We are really challenged by this in Southwest Florida. And part of it is the scale of the problem, right? It's an invisible problem to many people. It happens on a very long time scale. It happens on very large spatial scales, and that's just hard for people to understand.
There's been widespread consensus among over 97% of scientists from all disciplines that climate change is caused by humans and exacerbated by humans, and our inability to make any changes or take action is further exacerbating the issue of climate change.
I think the state of panic on the issue of climate change is an 11 out of 10. I think we should have been doing things 50 years ago. It's really hard to read about or watch anything that is explaining that there were scientists sounding alarms 50 plus years ago. It's really disheartening to learn about that and know about that.
We're not just looking at one study. We're not just looking at carbon in the atmosphere, or we're not just looking at how much sea level has risen on average. We're looking at the impacts on soil. We're looking at the impacts on one flower or plant species in the Sierra Nevada mountains, marching up that mountain. And we're thinking, well, why is it doing that? Well, it's because climate is changing. So most of what I do is try to find ways to communicate that urgency, to communicate the scale of the problem, and that yes, they can make an impact. They can work towards positive change, and that it will matter.
The good news is that the nation and the world has been moving more toward that position, I think, particularly in recent years, and there have been encouraging signs. I think in Florida, the progress toward recognizing that has been less, but it's still improved significantly, particularly at the local level in recent years.
I'm standing here in a hollowed out business located on Fort Myers Beach, a business and an entire community that was devastated by Hurricane Ian in late September. And it serves as a great exemplar in a horrific way of how climate change can influence the intensity and impact of tropical storms and hurricanes. Hurricane Ian came to shore, bringing with it hurricane force winds, Category 4 winds, but it was less of a wind damaging event and more of a storm surge damaging event. And storm surge is one of those consequences of climate change, where storms persist with winds blowing more and more water on shore. That water comes on shore and just overtakes and overwhelms a community, and that's what happened here. Fort Myers Beach is a barrier island. This barrier island was overwashed and inundated with over 10 feet, maybe 12 feet of storm surge. The water literally ripped through this building and caused the destruction that you see here.
Why are we having climate change? We're having it because we've had centuries of development where the production of energy was from carbon sources, coal, oil, and gas. It allowed us to build a wonderful economy that we all benefit from. But that release of carbon into the atmosphere has accelerated the impacts that we are now experiencing from the heating of the atmosphere the warming of the oceans, and a host of other impacts.
When we talk about warming, we talk about changing evaporation rates, changing precipitation rates. The ocean is warming and it's also causing the ocean to expand. So we are also dealing with sea level rise. So all of that impact the way we manage water in South Florida. So yes, climate change is central to the work that we do in this agency.
Much of what we experience on the day-to-day regarding climate change, we don't connect our actions to their impact very well. We drive around in cars, we fly around in planes. All of those things are part of our daily lives, and people really feel like their hands are tied in a lot of ways and that they can't affect change because frankly, our world is now built with fossil fuels in mind. They relieve themselves of the responsibility in a way because what can I do in a world that's built for fossil fuel? So really what I try to do is work with everyone from kindergartners all the way to our retirees and our seasonal folks that are here in Florida to help them understand, one, how special this place is where we live, because people already know that, right? That's why they're coming down here on a seasonal basis. And so help them remember that all of these things they love about Southwest Florida, they're gonna change, right? So if we don't change our behavior, things are gonna look here the way they look now, and we're not gonna be able to enjoy the same things that we enjoy in Southwest Florida in the face of climate change. When sea levels rise, our ecosystems will change, our shorelines will change, our ability to recreate in ways that Southwest Florida is known for, it won't be there anymore. When we think about increased extreme weather, hurricanes are going to have a significant impact on the way that we live our lives, on whether or not we can buy homes here, where we're going to need to build our homes. So all of these things will drastically change the landscape of the way we live in Southwest Florida.
Florida is a very unusual state. It's largely a coastal state. A high percentage of the population either lives right on the coast, I think around 20%, or within 10 miles of the coast. I think then you go up to maybe 50 or 60% of the total population. It's a coastal-oriented state. We have 800 miles of beaches in the state. Already over 400 of them, over half of them are eroded by state definition. And our population has grown from around 3 million at the end of World War II to 22 million today. So you put these forces together, this relentless growth in population and development, concentrated along our coastlines, which are our most vulnerable areas, and something has to give.
When you want to look locally, let's take South Florida, East or West Coast, you have to also add in the regional influences and flowing of the Florida current in the Gulf Stream and the redistribution of mass. As ice melts, water's not attracted to that big mass, so it moves away. Those add in South Florida to our sea level rise. So a 5-foot sea level rise might become an 8 or 9 foot sea level rise. There are 2-foot intervals, and you can see how quickly the Naples area, Southeast Florida, Sanibel area is inundated. Here we're only at 8 feet and South Florida is gone. Since almost all the heat from global warming has transferred from the atmosphere to the ocean, there's really no way to just undo this because we have to cool back down the ocean, which is already expanding through its warmth, and it is beginning to dramatically accelerate ice melt in the polar regions of Greenland and Antarctica.
A couple of the consequences of warming of the planet is an increase in sea level. Ice and glaciers melt, the volume of the oceans increases, and that causes high tides to become higher over time. The ocean has a great capacity to expand its volume and flood major portions of land. In addition, warming oceans fuel tropical storms and hurricanes. The warmer the water, the more intense the storms, the slower those storms move, so the greater impact they're likely to have on coastal communities. When you have a higher high tide because sea level has risen, and you put storm surge on top of that, the capacity to flood and inundate a community becomes even greater. So it's that synergistic effect of sea level rise and storms that worries coastal communities around the planet, particularly here for us in Florida.
We should have started 40 years ago. By stopping everything now won't end the problem. We're in for it. If we don't end it, it's going to be more and more and more beyond those levels.
We can see on the landscape as we move forward into the future where storm surge on top of sea level rise is likely to occur. And the maps are showing you those kinds of scenarios. The colors represent the extent and depth of flooding as we move forward into the future. The hotter the colors, the deeper the inundation. So we've replayed Ian's track and characteristics through that model, and that model then produced some pattern of storm surge and flooding depth around the Southwest Florida landscape. And you can compare what nature dealt us against what the model hindcasted, and the match was remarkable. So this tool that we now have in our hands here in Southwest Florida can be quite valuable in predicting, again, the impact of future storms with respect to surge and flooding. One of the things we're doing at the Water School at Florida Gulf Coast University is we're literally mapping the morphology, the shape of the coast, using drone-based technology. So we're putting a drone up in the air and we're literally mapping the topography of the post-Ian world, and then we're able to compare that topography with what existed here before the storm. And when we have that before and after glimpse, we can tell managers and decision makers where their areas of greatest vulnerability sit, what kinds of regions are most likely to be impacted in the future, and then how to help manage those areas as they go through the rebuilding and restoration planning for the island. Fort Myers Beach, the city, sits on Estero Island. If you look at the Barrier Island communities and the incorporated cities that sit on those barrier islands, we have Captiva, Sanibel, Fort Myers Beach, just to name three here in Southwest Florida that were seriously impacted by Hurricane Ian. All three of those barrier islands were completely overtopped and overwashed by storm surge. This entire island, just like the other barrier islands along the coast, were completely underwater. And that begs the question as to how do you actually rebuild in that sort of situation to be resilient so that you're not rebuilding this mess over and over again as you move forward in the future. And I think that it requires that decision makers, people, elected officials, local government need to think carefully about how they invest future money in rebuilding these communities and keeping them safe.
I think there's a lot to be learned from what happened with Hurricane Ian. It was the worst natural disaster that this area has ever experienced. And it's really a matter of are we willing to do the work to gather the information and to learn from it. So you want to have a resiliency plan that's fair and equitable to everybody. And we do have some neighborhoods in the city of Naples, and obviously there's plenty more in Collier County that are poorer, lower income. One here in Naples is River Park, which was badly flooded by the recent Hurricane Ian. And we want to try to do everything we can to make sure those neighborhoods continue to be sustainable for the people who live here.
When asked what the top challenges are for our region, the variable precipitation and definitely the heat. It's going to get really hot here, and heat kills people.
But we need to consider that every population, every one of us living in Florida is exposed to the impacts of a changing climate, especially workers that are exposed to outdoor environments in the daily basis. That varies from construction workers to farmer workers. So everywhere in Florida, we are facing those impacts.
Myself, as a farm worker, I've seen an experience the rise in temperature firsthand. I've been working in the fields where a fellow farm worker passes out because it's too hot. Sometimes myself, I've gotten cramps working in the field. But there's really nothing you can do about that, because you don't want to go and speak out or not continue working, because if you do that, then you're not promised that the next day you're going to have a job, right? You don't want to build a reputation of being the person who can't handle this heat.
So looking at individuals that are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, things like air quality, extreme heat and extreme temperatures, coastal flooding, nuisance flooding and inundation. So those groups of individuals that are working outside, or individuals that are not able to access things like cooling centers or air conditioning, and those groups of people that are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So as we experience greater increases in temperatures or extreme heat days, those groups of people that aren't able to be shielded from those types of things are going to feel the impacts of climate change and are feeling the impacts of climate change at a greater rate.
There are neighborhoods where it's mostly wealthy white people, and then there are neighborhoods where it's people of color who are in working class jobs. And yeah, when it comes to this place and whatever is going to happen here in terms of being in Southwest Florida and the maps we see of water rising, I mean, we see that this place is not going to be livable in not that much time. So what is the plan for all the people who cannot afford to, with their own money, move somewhere else? Are we just gonna forget them?
There will be portions of our landscape that will become uninhabitable. There'll be places on our landscape that may require communities to pack up and move and relocate.
There are things we can do about it, and all of us as individuals and companies and businesses and government, we have to get together to do what we need to do to stop as much as we can. Some is going to continue, but there are things we can do.
What we really need to do is be more responsible, be engaged, and stop consuming as much as we can, recycle not only the water, but recycle everything we have to actually be more sustainable. You know, we have no plan B, we only have one planet. We're not gonna go to Mars anytime soon and mess up another planet.
Saving my grandchildren from a miserable life, if they could exist at all, to me is extremely worthwhile, and we have to do that.
People of my era have had a very comfortable life, and we've created a massive problem. And we should not leave it just to our kids to solve this. We should aggressively go after this right now. Changing our energy sources, planting trees, all these things that will help make a more habitable planet for ourselves and all our future generations.
To tackle climate change, what we're really going to have to do is have a paradigm shift in the way we use resources. All types of resources, from the consumer goods that we buy, purchase, and throw out, to water, to land. Ultimately, what we want to do is create a built environment that's a little bit denser. We can create really great places that are just a little more urban, a little more compact. And that will be a huge impact on our climate future.
Choosing to walk or ride a bike or use public transportation instead of a car, limiting their air travel.
We have an active program of converting our fleet of county vehicles to electric vehicles, deploying solar on top of rooftops, floating solar arrays, capturing methane from our solid waste facilities. Everything we can do to reduce our carbon emissions.
We have many strong programs who are doing as much as they can to help the environment in terms of reducing CO2 and restoring very important ecosystems. So yes, that's a part of the solution, but it's definitely important for our governments to come together to work on agreements and whatever it is that they need to do collectively to help put in place very stringent policies so that we as an entire human nation are following those policies and being accountable.
Congress passed and the President signed the Inflation Reduction Act. And I believe that's the first piece of legislation, the first law that directly addresses mitigation by providing economic incentives for greener technology, for more efficient energy sources.
I think the key question here is when we all understand that the planet is one and we all need to act together, is when we are all going to be having to be committed, all the counties together can really work with that. It's beyond just thinking about individual boundaries. This is a global issue.
We've been involved in a couple of projects around environment the last couple of years. One of them that we're very proud to be part of is Climate Solutions, where we're in collaboration along with the Collaboratory, FGCU, the Conservancy, and EcoAmerica. The second project that we worked on were trees. We had the Botanical Garden grow for us 3,500 trees that we handed out to anyone in the community who wanted them.
We work here at the local level with the Corps of Engineers to focus on how we can create natural infrastructure, mangroves, larger dunes along our beaches, other vegetation that can provide protection for our physical structures and our people, rather than only relying on physical infrastructure, meaning sea gates, sea walls, other floodgates, other kinds of very large and expensive kinds of investments that not only are expensive, but can be visually and aesthetically problematic, and frankly are also largely unproven in terms of their effectiveness in preventing the floods from impacting the community.
Everybody can actually do his little piece. Whether you're vegetarian, you're making a home like mine, consume less, you downscale, all of those are very, very easy tips that everybody can do.
I came of age in the late 60s, early 70s when the environmental movement was born, really, the first Earth Day, the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, and so many things. It was a youth-driven movement, and there was tremendous energy and advocacy around that. Certainly we're seeing that with climate change around the world as well.
I can't imagine the worry that I would have for the next generation that I already have without my own offspring. So certainly I feel that parents are more aware of the impacts of climate change because they, have future generations to worry about. And I think as a teacher, I teach future generations, and I see a lot of those young people as extensions of the work that I'm doing.
What gives me hope is the Sunrise Movement. And the Sunrise Movement is a youth movement to fight climate change and create millions of jobs in the process. Really, it's about people under the age of 35 having a voice and having somewhere to go to learn how to stand up and make change. I'm 29, so I'm on the older side, but there are people that are in the movement that are freshmen in high school, that are 13, 14, 15 years old. Young people throughout time have been the ones who are yelling more, fighting more, willing to put their life on the line, and are ready to make change. It's nothing new that young people are the ones who are pushing for big change.
We're really lucky here in Southwest Florida. We have a group of high school students called the Youth Against Climate Change that were really inspired by the global youth movement around climate change and are doing what they can right here in Southwest Florida to inspire change in their communities.
Vote with your wallet. Support companies that have green policies.
Keep your thermostat at a moderate level.
Use public transportation or ride your bike.
Eat less beef, poultry, and dairy.
Drive an electric vehicle or hybrid.
Shop secondhand. Americans buy 68 new items of clothing each year.
Go solar if you can.
Plant trees. Reduce loans and fertilizers.
Elect green candidates.
Become climate change ambassadors, like us.